South Africa is at a pivotal stage, and on the eve of one of the most significant State of the Nation addresses in the country's post-apartheid era, President Cyril Ramaphosa will have to ease worries and negative sentiment at a time when polling suggests that the ANC's ruling support is at an all-time low. Now, let's reflect on some of the statements made by the President in last year's SONA in relation to youth, unemployment and investment and support for black women. I'm joined by Dr. Nthabiseng Moleko, business development economist at Stellenbosch Business School. Dr. Moleko, thank you so much for joining us on Newzroom Afrika this afternoon. Now, we are approaching the State of the Nation address tomorrow. Last year, the President spoke favorably about the presidential stimulus and other interventions by government to create jobs. But the stats of unemployed people are on the rise. It seems what is said at SONA and what is felt on the ground are black and white.
Thank you so much for having me on a very good day. I think the reality is that the commitments that are made, and I know that several commitments have been made around issue of youth unemployment in particular, whether it's the presidential initiative, the stimulus, and also placing 20,000 children in TVET colleges, various children, 10,000, I think the target was for Home Affairs, having young people, helping them digitize. The long and short of it is you're sitting with a crisis situation when you're talking about youth unemployment of discouraged work seekers of over 3 million in the population. You're also sitting with a youth unemployment phenomena that is unheard of, where you have the people in the prime of their lives not working. So 15 to 24 or 15 to 34, more than 2 million young people are actually not active in the economic activity. What this tells you is that the contribution to more than 6 of the 9 provinces that have expanded definition of unemployment that exceeds 40%, the bulk of those people are the youth. The reason for this is because we are unable to be able to accept that our composition of GDP, the way in which we contribute in terms of economic sectors to output, primarily comes from services. Our mining, our agriculture, our manufacturing, our construction and utilities, which are labor-absorptive sectors that will absorb low-skilled, and they will absorb large masses of the youth into the economic mainstream, are actually contracting, and they've been contracting for 10 to 15 years. And whatever efforts have been put in place are simply inadequate. So these are some of the structural problems. So you'll hear a lot of interventions around the economy, around economic growth, even around interventions for SMME and enterprise development, tax incentives, investment conferences. But if they don't translate to changing the composition of GDP, the structure of the economy, it's not going to aid us to deal with the unemployment problem. So we can make many announcements, but until we change the structure of the economy, we've got to industrialize, we've got to improve manufacturing capabilities, we've got to begin to develop the nodes that are what I call economic wastelands, because they simply were forgotten by apartheid government, and so too the current government hasn't done sufficiently in the Northern Cape, in the Free State, in the Eastern Cape, in Limpopo. These are provinces that have not yielded the growth patterns of KZN, of Gauteng and Western Cape, and they've simply been left behind. I'll include Mpumalanga as well. So we've got to do so much more, and I think that's why the problem persists.
Now, speaking of these structural changes, do you get a sense at all when you do listen to the President deliver his State of the Nation address that there is a chance at all to intervene on these structural changes? I mean, today we're sitting at an unemployment rate that's over 40%. But, I mean, as grim as that sounds, you also mention in your articles as well that doesn't even include those who have stopped seeking for employment purely based on just being discouraged by the environment that we find ourselves in. And then until these structural changes actually happen, what we're going to see is new people entering into the market also being disheartened as well.
So is there a will? I think South Africans have come out of a denialist state. What you want to see is the government coming out of deep-rooted denial. We've got to accept as a nation we haven't performed, simply put. We are seeing the worst economic performance in the last 4 decades as a nation. What do I mean by that? We're seeing 0.6, 0.9, less than 1% growth last year, this year being projected. And the reason for this is because the conditions for the economic environment is worsening. Infrastructure is not being maintained. Enabling infrastructure from the logistics network is not being maintained. So you have commitments around efficiencies with Transnet, improving the Transnet roadmap, the logistics of roadmap, making sure that you reduce the operational challenges around our railways, which are necessary for domestic activity. And we're seeing minimal efforts to really transform this, and this is a leadership issue. I think the other aspects that you need to do is improve the capacity of the state. And the state is all the departments, the provinces, that we're going to hear about the massive amounts of money that are going to go to them yet again in the new financial year through the Ministry of Finance. Are they able to perform and do what is required? And I think that we've got to get out of a state where we simply meet whatever APP objectives are, and we are not seeing a movement in the numbers. We're not seeing a movement in inequality and the quality of life. The business confidence levels are at the lowest levels we've seen historically, and we are where we are putting ourselves is with BRICS economies, the Chinas, the Brazils, the Indias, and yet we're seeing our economic conditions worsen, and there's very little, I would say, urgency. And I want to emphasize the urgency with which we need to act and rise as a nation. There's no time but now. And I think that the problems we face are going to affect all of us in society. And I think that we have to have a change in the mindset and in the capacity to respond to some of the urgent problems. So whether I see a willingness to rehabilitate some of these entities, I think the pace that is needed, I think the urgency to make decisions, I think the necessary leaders that need to be enabled to make these decisions, I think we're still very constrained.
What do you expect the president to say regarding the economy? I mean, from previous State of the Nation's addresses, you know, when he talks about the economy and unemployment this time around, should we have confidence in him? Because when I'm just listening to you now talk about, for instance, the rail network, we're seeing more and more trucks on the road. We're not seeing our rail network being resolved. But what we do hear time and time again in various State of the Nation addresses is sort of the achievements of government, and not this frank talk that you're giving of this ailing infrastructure, of a worsening economy and the crisis that we find ourselves in. Should we rather not have that kind of talk that may be daunting, but is quite realistic?
So the reality is, I think the presidency has publicly said in their own SONA targets from last year that the bulk of these targets haven't been met. So of the 62 commitments, more than half of them have not been met, 35 out of 62. What does this say? This says to you that they're not able to deliver on their own presidential page in terms of commitments and achievements. We know as well that 27 targets have been met, but what are those targets that have been met? They're the non-key, I would say they're not game changers. If you look on the energy side, we have a crisis of energy because that's the one big enabler for any economy to perform and fulfill its obligations and meet some of its targets. And we know that the bulk of the energy plan, what the Minister of Electricity was inundated with, the appointment of himself over the Energy Action Plan, we know that the investment in transmission lines didn't happen. We know that deployment to 6 priority stations, according to them, may have happened, but we're still seeing some significant challenges around Pusile, Komati, and several other power generating value chain aspects of our value chain. The load shedding last year alone, we had a record 334 load shedding. This is a shocking show of loss of capacity by one of the most important entities. And you know that this has shelved almost 2% of GDP. And I won't talk about the multiplier effect in several industries because of time. But I think that we have to really just accept that if we're unable, last year's 60 plus targets, the president met 27, 35 were not met. What this says is, what about, can he tell us more about those that were not met? Let's not get new commitments. Let's not get new promises this year. Let's focus on the ones that are key game changers for us, around jobs, around unemployment. We haven't even spoken about safety and commitment around the crime levels in this country. How are efforts to improve the efficiency of SAPS, the efficiency of the sexual offences courts to deal with gender-based violence, what is happening around enabling that presidential commitment and plan around a national strategic action plan, particularly on the areas around crime prevention, but also changing the mindset of South Africans, young men, dealing with the issue of prevention rather than responding. Let's deal with the 35 targets that were not met. Let's not get new targets. Let's not get new targets. That is my view.
Let's deal with the promises and the targets that we had already put in place. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon.